This is the story of Intel, the absolute market leader over the past 50 years in the semiconductor industry, and a company that today is facing challenges on multiple fronts from big international companies like Apple, Taiwan Semiconductor, and of course their main competition, AMD. So just going to this timeline, you can see that in 2011 everything was good for Intel, and then as time went on in 2016 and 17 things started to look dire. So what happened in 2011 and between those years between 11 and 2016? So you can see that AMD had just launched their new product with a CPU architecture called Bulldozer, and Bulldozer was an absolute monumental failure on AMD's behalf, which allowed Intel, that already was dominating in the market, become even more dominating. And also in a sense, I think this was also what basically made up their failure in the future, because they become just too lazy. They didn't innovate and their products become less and less better every year that went on. So this allowed AMD to have a comeback in 2017 with a product called Zen. But why was AMD allowed to have a comeback with Zen 1 in 2017? So we have to go back to Ivy Bridge, Haswell, Broadwell, Skylake and Kaby Lake to see what actually happened. So Intel in 2011 were on their 22 nanometer project, or actually maybe 32 nanometer, sorry. And then they again had a couple of generations on the 22 nanometer, and then come 14 nanometer. And you can see immediately here that the chunk of time for 14 nanometer is much larger than for 22, 32 and 45, so on. So basically what happened, Intel ran into this trouble. They were going to have originally 10 nanometer ready already in 2016, so this would be at this stage here. But as they run into troubles with the 10 nanometer project, they had to just relaunch new products from Skylake to Kaby Lake, from Kaby Lake to Coffee Lake, from Coffee Lake to Comet Lake, which you can see here. And this allowed for the stagnation, and also this allowed AMD on opening to have some success with the Zen 1. So how was Zen 1? Well, we can actually see on the headline immediately here that Ryzen review, AMD is back. AMD's wanted Ryzen CPU is a multi-threaded monster. They say monster, you can see it here. So Zen 1 launches, and you can immediately see the effects of the launch of Zen 1 in this graph here. So look at the end of the graph here. In 2017, we see the first sign of comeback for AMD and losing market share for Intel. So we spoke about Zen 1 and Zen Plus, and now let's look into Zen 2 and Zen 3. So looking at the market share, we can see that AMD kept gaining back market share from Intel with Zen 2 and Zen 3. And the market actually really liked Zen 2. We can see here that AMD Zen 2 architecture explode. What makes Ryzen 3000 so powerful? So already in the headline, again as Zen 1, you can see that the market liked the product. And at the same time, roughly 4 or 5 weeks later, after launch of Zen 2, Intel actually admits that they still have problems with the 10 nanometer project. Mind you, this is 3 years later after the supposed launch, they still have troubles. So this definitely helps AMD to fight with older than planned Intel products rather than the state-of-the-art products from Intel. And you can see actually that going from Zen 2 to Zen 3, so this is late 2020 during the pandemic, you can see here that again, same story as before. Market is very happy with launch of Zen 3, especially the 5950X, which is the highest end product, which basically decimates both in performance wise, power wise, and also price wise compared to Intel's product. And the problem for Intel here is that, going to this timeline, so not only is AMD actually executing from Zen 1 to 2 and Zen 3, now the biggest company on the planet joins the fight for Intel, and that is Apple. So remind you that back in the 2017 area, Apple was launching MacBooks with Intel's CPUs, and this could be from different generation of Intel CPUs, so 6th generation, 7th generation and so on. But Apple was not so happy with the products because the battery life were not so good, because Intel CPUs were consuming a lot of power, and actually they didn't even get so much better year on year. So at some point Apple decides to, okay, we need to take the stuff into our own hands, and they start to manufacture their own products with their own CPUs. And this is this area here. So you can see that at 2019 it was only AMD and Intel. But then something happens in late 2020, you can see the light blue, and then especially in 2021 you can see the real trend there, that not only is Intel losing market share to AMD, but there's another player, the ARM based CPUs, which also is basically what Apple is doing. So the 10.7% is mostly probably Apple there, and because they own I think 90% of the market share of Apple of ARM. So yeah, we can see on the timeline again there that first AMD, and then Apple joining with the M1 and M2. We can see here. And also in late 2022, which is basically just recently, M2 launches and Zen 4. So now let's see, how was the market's reaction to Zen 4? Well, same story again. Absolute success for AMD. Everyone is happy. There's a giant improvement compared to Zen 3. So this adds more salt to this wound for Intel. And you can see the data as of latest Q1 of 2023. AMD, I believe, is still going to claw back some more market. Possibly even, as some say, more than 50%, which is unprecedented in the 21st century. So we've spoken about Zen 4 that AMD launched, but we can also see that there's another problem for Intel, as we spoke before, and that is ARM-based CPUs and PCs. So this article speaks about 30% of the market being ARM by end of the decade, which is, yeah, it's a lot of market share going from Intel to competition. And we can actually see here that this other article, again, 30% of the PCs might be built on ARM architecture, which is a big trouble for Intel, definitely. And now you start to see the reason why different analyses are coming out on the web, where people talking about, for example, like this one, Intel is losing market share left, right and center. Well, no surprise, because they've been losing market share to ARM, they've been losing market share to AMD, they've been losing market share to even Apple. So you might wonder, are they gonna lose market share to even more companies? Well, sadly for Intel, the answer is quite clearly yes, because there's also this company NVIdia that we haven't spoken about in this video. And as some of you might know, that usually in the data center, which is actually the part of bread and butter for Intel, in the data center it's always been CPU heavy. But in the latest developments in the last 3-4 years and going into the 2030s, with AI being applied in many different applications, you're gonna need a lot of GPUs. So a lot of server companies and server applications are using much more percentage of the entire server unit that are built with GPUs and not only CPUs. So NVIdia is really strong in this area. They are definitely the market leader in this area, and you can see that NVIdia holds 91.4% of the enterprise GPU market in 2021, and basically the rest is in AMD's hands. So Intel is non-existent in this area. So as we spoke in the beginning, not only are they fighting with AMD, the old foe, they are fighting with Apple, with TSMC, with ARM, and now NVIdia. So this definitely makes you wonder, will they be able to have the same position in the market as they had between 2010 and 2017? Or is this a basically impossible task due to just the sheer amount of competitive companies they are facing, especially some of them like Apple is just the biggest company on the planet? It's a good question. So now that we've spoken about all the bad news, let's see about the future. So where will Intel be, let's say from 2024 and onwards? So we can see here that one of the main reasons why Intel actually started to have troubles with the 10 nanometer process, as we spoke here in 2016, which didn't launch until 4 years later in 2020. Part of the reasons that they had issues is actually they didn't have the EUV machines, which enables the manufacturing once you go down to 7 nanometer and 4 nanometers and so on. So as you can see, according to this guy, which I believe also is quite accurate, 53 of these machines were manufactured until 2021, and Intel has only 3 or 4 at a time. Most of the others are either at Samsung or Taiwan Semiconductor. So Intel didn't have a lot of these machines, which also made really big trouble for them once they went down to 7 nanometer and 10 nanometer and so on. And you can see that in the latest few years, with the change of CEO, Intel is actually trying to have this new business model like one of their main competitors, Taiwan Semiconductor. Because as you recall, Taiwan Semiconductor, they actually don't do their own products, but they are a factory for Apple, for AMD, for NVIdia, and for many other companies like Qualcomm, for example. So what Intel sees, well, we have actually our own factories. Sure, we can use them for our own products, but we can also maybe in the future make money to make products for even our competitors like AMD or Apple. So this is what this all new IDM strategy is about. And for Intel to maybe challenge and get back their position as undisputed market leader, they need to have success in the IDM business. This is one of the absolute main parts of their future. They need to execute very well on the 7 nanometer, 4 nanometer and so on. So I believe with the rumors coming out and some of the, for example, this person that I have followed on Twitter for a long time, and I think his information is very accurate. He states that they should have enough EUV machines. Again, these machines that we spoke about here, that enables manufacturing at the lower nanometer process. According to him, they should having a few machines that will at least allow them to have 10% of their product portfolio with EUV, which enables better processors in the future. So going from, with that in mind, going to basically the interesting numbers. So you can see that with all the history we spoke about, revenue is just falling off. Nothing new here. You can see like almost 80 billion and they're going down really fast. So gross margin going down even faster. Like look at this, mid 40 billions to 20, so halved basically in just a few quarters. We can see the operating income, absolutely epic failure, from 20 billion to loss. Now going to cash on hand, they seem to have a bit of cash on hand. So compare the money they have on their hands compared to AMD, but the problem here is not the cash on hand, the problem here is the debt. Yeah, the amount of debt they have is, long-term debt is much more than AMD. So all of these things point to, in my view, that we have still to see the worst from Intel. But also, looking at the latest Q1 report, you can see that client and computing, so this is basically your personal computers, down almost 40% year on year. Data center down almost 40% year on year. So these two are very big parts for Intel, and they cannot afford to lose more market share, but it looks like they will keep losing market share. So not good again. And you can see here in more detail the client and computing side. They made almost 3 billion in profit last year, operating income, and now $500 million. So just killing the margins. And in the data center it's even worse. So in my opinion, with everything considered, I believe that the company is not so overvalued at the moment, and I believe that probably in the next year there will be opportunities to buy this company and if they keep executing well in their IDM business with 4 and 3 nanometers, and there are already some signs that even TSMC might run into some troubles with the 3 nanometer, which means that Apple and AMD will be slowing down a bit. So I believe the worst is soon to be over, but we are still not there yet. I think give it a year or two, and then maybe we will reevaluate Intel. And hopefully for investors in Intel, the IDM business is successful. And if that is the case, I definitely believe that a company with this much history and the market cap of just over 100 billion, and comparing it to, for example, NVIdia, which is, I mean, yeah, look at this. It's almost, I mean, they're closing on 1 trillion, and that is all because of the AI. So yeah, I think there's definitely opportunity for Intel. If they just get successful in the IDM business, we probably will see them have a good future, and the stock should rebound from there. But to end up this video, which is very long, I think like it's not time yet, but maybe in 1 year's time. So again, sorry for the long video, but I believe it's important to look into the detail on the market and what's been happening over the last 10 years. And thank you for watching, and please subscribe and like the video. Bye.